Every organization has data. Every leader has a title. But the ones who actually move people, they have a story. I'm Dr. Rod Berger, storyteller, author of The Narrative Edge, and your storyteller in residence here at CultureCon. And this is a conversation with one of our culture catalysts. These are leaders who understand that culture isn't built through policies and posters. It's built through the stories that get told in hallways, in meetings, in the quiet moments when no one's performing. The leaders you'll hear from in this series aren't just shaping workplaces, they're shaping narratives. And at their core, they're storytellers, whether they know it yet or not. So here's the question I want us to sit with today. Are you the author of your story, or are you a character in someone else's? Let's find out together. As many of you know, I am, and I hope you do, because I'm such big fans of this organization, but I have been recently, in this 2026 year, named Storyteller in Residence for this fantastic group, CultureCon. And if you have any interest in just culture in work environments, organizations, to understand really that human element, right? The underbelly of what we all do, what we strive to achieve together, they are just fantastic people. And like really great organizations, they attract incredible talent. And so we're going to be spending time with one of their CultureCon culture catalysts today. Just a fantastic group of people that have been named by Zach and Nick over at CultureCon and the folks that run this fantastic organization. But let me give you a little background on who we're going to be speaking with today. Todd Wuestenberg, he's a chief culture officer at Haverkamp Group, and why I wanted to chat with Todd. You know, there's something that I think a lot about that when a company grows fast, really fast, and you guys know across over 4,000 interviews, I've spent time with so many different organizations that have grown at different, different paces, and some for the better and some not maybe for the better in the way in which it's impacted culture. But casualty is often the story that I hear when it comes to an interview. I sort of get it in those last chapters. And the thing that makes companies special, I've found, is that when they're small when they start and they thin out, it waters down and eventually they disappear into the noise of scale. But it's the ones that I find that understand the power of story from the beginning, the middle, and what will be that end. And for some, that's the exit, and others, it's the collaboration with other groups, channel partners, innovation that they didn't think they could even sort of bear witness to that comes to pass. And Todd is in that camp. And that's why, and it's really no pun intended with Haverkamp Group. I just noticed that, Todd. But to understand operationally where somebody is at and then to grow into a chief culture officer says to me a lot about sort of what makes you tick, sort of the engine that you are and the group that you're a part of, and doing it in background. You know, the thing that stood out to me, Todd, as we now begin our chat today is development. That it's almost as if sometimes, in journalism, they'll talk about burying the lead, right? And when I was looking through the work that you guys have done, I thought, wait a minute, they're bearing the lead a little bit. So I'm giving you a bit of a compliment in this regard, right? But that you have really built this very organized culture and the way in which you talk about it. And to me, really, the lead is the development piece because I'm seeing people that feel a part of something. And today that feels more valuable than ever. And not even to be hyperbolic about it, but I just feel like we're really looking for connection. So I want to start here. That's a very long preamble to say I'm fascinated. And I think this could be because I'm a dad too, really wondering what are the cultures that my kids are going to eventually be engaged in and with across their own professional careers when they graduate and matriculate through school. Now they're younger, but I just think the world is moving really, really fast, and it's important to understand how groups are doing it, I think, in a thoughtful way. We don't have all the answers, but I think if we're thoughtful about it along the way, we can do pretty well. So, Todd, let's go back. Help me understand culture from the kitchen table that you grew up around. How do you understand it, right? I mean, I think you live in Iowa. Maybe it's this romantic notion of Iowa as a state, and I just imagine being a young person where conversation is interesting and plentiful, and you understand your relationship to everything from the earth and what is produced for the rest of the country and sort of your stake in that. But what was culture like at your home?
First of all, thank you, Rod, for allowing me to be a guest on your podcast. Really appreciate it. Thinking about what it was like growing up, I just remember moments, and you use this word already, but connectiveness. There's always a sense of being connected, whether it was be with family or community. I grew up in a small town. There was only 1,500 of us. I had 48 in my graduating class. I mean, just everybody knew everyone. So there's definitely that sense of feeling connected with others and understanding that you're a part of just something bigger than yourself. And so that, was something that I think really shaped me and formed me from a kind of from a worldview perspective. And that has just obviously carried over my lifetime and into the workplace. But yeah, growing up, it's maybe somewhat stereotypical, small town Iowa. Yeah, you talked about sitting around a table, lots of conversations around the table. As I grew older, and started, developing a taste for coffee. I can remember my dad and I just going through a pot of coffee together, just talking about stuff, And so, yeah, definitely connected.
I just love that. Right there, what a fantastic little nugget there talking about sharing a pot of coffee with your dad
Mm.
and talking about things. I don't know why that hits me, but that hits me in a way where I just feel like our relationship to time has changed so much. And one of the things that, I mean, we can sort of talk brass tacks in some of the different ways that you guys at Haverkamp Group have built and sort of structured culture. But is this notion around time and that, I'd love for you to talk about being a culture farmer because we were saying off air that I've always sort of thought of, gosh, I don't know, a lot of areas of life that there's this sort of farming sense that you have to understand the soil, you have to understand the weather, you have to understand, the farms that are near and far and just the impact on what you're trying to grow. And these things can take time. There's not one way to do it in that manner, right? And so I love that this notion and doing the research was around sort of that culture farming. But that also to me, Todd says that there's a heightened value that's placed around time and its relationship that you have individually with it, patience and understanding from a development runway, and instilling that where it feels authentic to the group. Because I think we've all been there. I don't care really where you've worked, for profit, nonprofit, big corporation, small, town company or agency or firm. A lot of times there are these, we have these change initiatives, right? And it just can feel like it's this rinse and repeat. Oh, it's that time of year again, And boy, if you're not doing it well, all you're doing is you're pushing people further away from feeling connected, and they're not going to want to farm any idea that's a part of that mission and vision. How do you understand that? I mean, how do you think about it in a way where is it an onboarding issue for you when you think about how you're developing people that they understand the essence of what that means?
Yeah, to tie into farming and just tie into farmers themselves. I mean, I think you brought up the word time. I think farmers understand that there's a rhythm and there's a process to things. Like they don't just plant a seed of corn and expect to harvest it tomorrow. They understand that there's seasons, and even in those seasons, there's storms, there's these setbacks, but they understand and they trust the process. And so I think that is the approach we bring into our organization, is that we understand that it's a process and it's going to take time. And so, it actually starts before that onboarding. We really want to communicate who we are, the things that we believe in. We're a purpose driven, value based organization. So even in our job postings, we try to communicate that from the beginning. And then yes, onboarding is very important, but it's through that entire, I'll call, lifespan, our team members, that we want to understand that, or help them understand that this is a process, and for them to have a certain amount of patience to that. And we do live in a world where we want instant gratification. We want things now. So it takes patience to develop.
And so this may sound trite, and I don't mean it that way at all, but because I would imagine it was incredibly intentional, Todd. Is that part of that when you talked about not even just sort of with the onboarding element to this is help me understand the decision around your title because you could have been VP of people, head of HR, some classic things, but it feels as if even if I wasn't there or I was when I see chief culture officer, that has to send a message, not only to the people that are already there, but to potential talent that would be considering even applying, thinking about it, right? And what their world would be like if they joined what you guys are doing. Tell me about that decision.
Yeah, absolutely. Because words do matter, Rod, the words that we choose. And when leadership came to me and pitched this idea 4 years ago to move seats into this chief culture officer, I've been with the organization for 21 years now. And I've known our owner and founder, Brent Haverkamp, since our days at Iowa State University. First of all, I feel really fortunate and blessed to work for an organization that values this. And I know that's very unique. But I can remember that day where leadership came into my office and I'll say pitched the idea. And they actually used the word chief people officer. And this has been something that had been, rolling around in my brain for some time. I said, hey, if anyone's gonna, stand up for people, it's gonna be me. But I really like the idea of chief culture officer because I said, culture is very complex.
Yeah.
And one way I would define it is it's a blend of people and processes. Because you could have the best people in the world processes, you're going to lose those people. And then conversely, you could have the best processes in the world. But if you're not hiring the right people and developing them, you're going to lose them as well. So I really thought it would be something very important to say, hey, we value culture. And part of culture, one way we define culture is a blend of people and processes.
And there's something that is there's motion tied to that as opposed to something like a fixed point in time, like I am the chief people officer, right? That the cultural element. I know that you talk about that culture is never neutral.
Right.
And I really like that because one, I think that should be that could be the title of a book that you would write. Because I do think that there's a different relationship to it. It's not as if there's an endpoint. Right. If it's neutral, that means that I always have to think about sort of my contribution to it. Right. Sort of it's that footprint. It's helping to understand not only what am I walking into, but what happens when like how am I impacting others and how are they impacting me? Is that how you think of that neutrality, or how does that play a role in because obviously running businesses there are tough decisions. There are challenging times. We're not sort of playing house. And so that neutrality can either serve you well, I would imagine, in certain situations, and also be a double-edged sword in others.
Rod, I don't know if you've ever had a guest reference World War Z, the movie World War Z, where
I've watched that. There have been plenty of plane rides where World War Z has been playing as I'm in and out because it's just, yes. So please, this is a first though.
so there's a moment where the main character, Brad Pitt, says something to the effect that movement or motion is life and that you have to keep moving forward. And so it's that idea of, adversity is going to hit, people are dynamic, times are dynamic. And if you're just stuck in neutral, just think that I don't have to take any action. I mean, the natural thing that's going to happen is, second law of thermodynamics. It's just going to regress just automatically. So it's this idea that we've got to keep looking at taking steps forward. And yeah, so movement is life. Stay curious. Let's keep growing and moving. And again, because people are dynamic, and as people change, times change, we've got to be able to adapt and move forward.
One of the areas that I thankfully have seen some shift in, I hope it continues, is the notion that, what we're talking about, they would always talk about like soft skills. And whenever I would hear that, I always thought to myself, this is not a nice to have. Right. It always felt like it was just sort of an icing on top or, sure, I'd like to have another helping of something. It's like, no, 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 no. We're talking about these are core fundamental skills to operate in a world that is remote, that is global, that is now becoming very fractional and skill based when we're outsourcing our knowledge in so many different ways and manners. How have you thought about that from a soft skills perspective because I would imagine that you could, or the industry in general could say, well, gosh, do I really want to be the head of something that is a nice to have? That doesn't sound terribly safe, right? Just from a professional outlook and trajectory.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a movement and, guys like Nick and Zach are, avant-gardes when it comes to this, this movement of not seeing it as a soft skill anymore, actually seeing it as a strategy, that I'm grateful I can have a seat around the table with the other executives and it's not seen as, a side project. Culture is seen as something being very integral and, kind of like a double bottom line. I think Edgar
Mm.
Schein, the father of organizational culture, was the first one to talk about that, having this double bottom line and culture being a part of that double bottom line. Because no question, there's now more and more research out there and more data that shows that, how important retention is and how that affects
Hmm.
the first bottom line, if you will, profitability. Because if you're always turning over people because they just don't like working there, that's not good. That's not good business strategies. You really want to obviously think about, okay, what kind of environment do we have here in our organization so that people can show up, be the best version of themselves, do great work and enjoy it. And guess what? It's going to be a win-win for everybody. So yeah, when I hear soft skill, again, I'm going to go back to Edgar Schein. I mean, he communicated in such a way that it was like almost life and death, that an organization would either rise or fall based on the organ culture. So that's not soft skill. That's that's life and death.
That's life and death. How do you help me understand like productive discomfort in one, how you think about that notion within an organization, and then how you sort of guide or facilitate that across a workforce so that I think that there's a level of reality, right? This sort of like, I mean, you obviously that's one far end of the spectrum, right? This sort of life and death component to it,
Right.
but just the reality that, in essence, contribution matters, participation matters. We're not sitting on the sidelines as passive participants. Maybe that's an oxymoron, but that notion of sort of that productive discomfort and how you've approached that.
Yeah, everybody has a role when it comes to creating organizational culture. It does start with leadership. They set the tone, they're the pace setters, but everybody has contribution um, to the organizational culture. And so this idea, this tension, if you will, I mean, life is messy. Things are going to fail. I mean, we had a little bit of trouble getting online here, didn't
We
we?
sure did. Yes, I raised
So
my hand on that.
so we're all going to face adversity. So, how do we respond in these moments so that when failure does happen, and that's something we talk about actually in the onboarding process, Rod, is we want to create an environment where people are okay to fail as long as they fail forward or they understand that, I learned something from this. And I love the transparency of our leadership. And I actually just did an interview with our owner and founder, Brent, and we talked about the life lessons he's learned in business from failing. And I don't know if I really answer your question here. I'm kind of circling around here, but it's just this idea that, hey, it's okay to fail. It's okay that there's gonna be these tensions. There's gonna be things are gonna be messy, but how do we just, again, keep moving forward in a positive way?
How do you think about the realities of the world that we're all living in and the variability from a day to day, not from a this is your personal or professional, let's say, opinion or perspective or even biases to some level, because we are human, but from a position of trying to understand or get ahead of these variables that might be impacting those that are sort of under your stewardship to some level, right? And that people don't just show up to work as robots. Funny that I'm using that statement in a world where we're, but how do you understand that? Because there's a level of like being able to. It's almost like you're a meteorologist, right? To some level, like you almost have to understand the sort of the winds of emotions that might be impacting not that employee or that colleague, but maybe a spouse, a family member, a family farm, right? And I these sorts of things. And I'm just wondering, how do you think about that conceptually? Is this a part of your professional learning? Do you think those things should be for those that would be coming up and being, sort of the next crop of chief culture officer?
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to that first word we talked about, being connected, and being connected means you have to have relationship. So you have to know the person. If you're going to impact and influence, you have to understand where that person is at, where they're going through. You build that trust with them. And so, yeah, when they come in and they're having a bad day, you recognize that and you can be empathetic and maybe why they're having a bad day. You know, there was a time in organizations, and I'm glad they're becoming a little bit more and more into the distance where, there's this idea, hey, you just check that stuff in at the door. You're
Hmm.
here to do your work,
Clock in.
clock, and then, but I mean, again, we're all human and our personal lives are going to bleed over into our professional lives. And guess what? Our professional lives bleed over into our personal lives. So, you know, I I like to talk about it, and we talk about it in our organization as far as this kind of work life harmony, not balance. Balance has a connotation of there being something transactional there. So we want to see something that's more, just that harming. And so it starts with being connected with the people that are working with, understanding them, being empathetic, and giving them space to be human. And that goes a long ways so that when maybe they get out of this, rough patch of life, this messy path of life that's really impacting them, that they'll come out on the other side and they'll remember how you treated them and the respect that you gave them. And guess what? They're going to show up and give their best.
I want to pivot a little bit and talk sort of, let's just talk about professional landscapes to some degree. I'm not saying this is at your organization, but I would imagine you have some ideas, some thoughts about it. Look, I mean, I just had it this weekend. Like, so many things happen at the soccer field, when you've got kids that are school age. And there's a parent that approached me who works for a global organization that actually you would be seeing their brand and their equipment scattered all across Iowa and the world. And there was this discussion around this fear of what AI is doing from the bottom up in the organization and how it is starting to sort of peel away either roles and responsibilities or just straight positions. And I'm just wondering how. I'm not saying that this has hit your organization, or that it will at some level of scale, and maybe you have more control because of a smaller, tight knit group and the way that you have it constructed. I'm just curious as to how you're thinking about this in a way to again go back to that meteorology sort of, you know, lane. How are you understanding it and thinking about conversations that aren't being had, but that you wouldn't fault people for thinking about when it comes to the value proposition they feel that they have now in an organization versus the fear that they might be losing some of that value if something else is taking a percentage of that work and contribution away in the name of efficiency?
Sure, sure. I'm gonna just stay in the lane that I'm familiar with, and that's multifamily housing. Been in multifamily housing for now over 30 years. And we do have AI in our workplace. We have, prospects or residents who will call, the local office and they're going to be greeted with, an AI. How we have talked about this with our employees is that our team members is that this doesn't make you less valuable in our organization. What this is going to do is actually going to free you up from doing just some of the mundane routine things. AI is going to be there to serve you so that you have more free time to do the thing that we think is most important. That's connecting with our residents,
Mm.
because connecting with our residents is so vital to building community. Our tagline is creating communities where people love to live. So the only way we're going to be able to create communities where people love to live is that we have this interaction. So don't see, this AI as a threat, see it as a tool to help you be freed up so you can have better, meaningful interaction with either a prospect that comes through that door or a resident that comes through that door and wants to have that face-to-face interaction. Embrace it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the embrace component because I think that a lot of folks are still trying to figure out the story how they're going to incorporate this story with the talent and the people that they've been relying on and working with for many years, right? Is to, how do we understand this? It's like you're adding a new family member to some degree, right? And to understand that, I want to remind everybody you can go and learn more about Todd and what all they're doing at Haverkamp Group. You can go to haverkampgroup.com. That's Haver, camp with a K, group.com. You can also visit cultureconusa.org to learn more about inspiring positive organizational culture. And if you haven't yet, get a copy of my book, The Narrative Edge: Authentic Storytelling That Meets the Moment. Todd, okay, let's sort of shift and talk about how you understand sort of the varying quadrants of building culture up. And the reason I want to bring that up is that you talk about in conversations and presentations that you've had, and it really hit me. One, I'm a visual learner, and I really like this notion of the fields of culture and understanding purposeful versus persistent. And that sort of gradient between surviving and grinding to striving and then ultimately thriving,
Right.
because it feels as if those are this sort of conversation is one that we're either all the way in or we fear we've got to figure out, but we haven't had these conversations because maybe we haven't built that culture. We haven't sort of developed the internal conversation and awareness, I think, and that ability, to your point, to feel free to fail, but do it forward. Because if you're going to be surviving at some point, you're going to have to grind through things. And some of that's probably going to be from falling down and getting back up to some degree. I know this is where you are with the fields of culture, and I want you to talk about that. But tell me about actually the process of getting to that, because that to me, the conversations about how you got to this are as valuable, if not maybe more valuable, than even sort of this slide here that you've got that sort of breaks this out into a 4-quadrant model.
Yeah, I'm a very simple man. I like simple things, and I think about culture, specifically thriving culture, because every organization has a culture. The question is it something that's thriving, or is it something
Yeah.
that just is there, if you will? And so a thriving culture, I think, has three key components. And they all start with the letter P, because I also like alliteration. It just helps me. It needs to be purposeful, it needs to be persistent, and there needs to be this plant component to it. Those first two that you reference in this field of culture is that in order, to have a thriving organization, you first of all have to be purposeful. And again, I am very much appreciative of leadership in our organization who sees it as being purposeful. Again, not just a little side hustle project type of thing. That no, they're being very intentional about wanting to invest in culture. And so, being purposeful, starts really with your values as well as your purpose statement. And I know some people might be thinking, well, that's pretty elementary, values and purpose statement. But I look at it as being the essentials, just kind of like,
Mhm.
sunshine and rain to a crop. You got to have those essentials for it to grow. And if you don't have, values and purpose in an organization, you're missing the essentials and you're not going to grow. So then the persistent side of it is this idea of working hard and working smart. We already talked a little bit about, how farmers are hard worker. Yet hard work is not only just from sun up to sundown type of thing, but just this whole being persistent and just running with the process and understand that there's a rhythm to everything. And so in an organization that is high in purpose and is committed to being working hard, not only working hard, but working smart. And oh my goodness, today agriculture is just obviously way different than what it was even 40 years ago as I was growing up with the, GPS and all this ag precision that farmers are working even smarter than ever. So it's not only the idea of working hard, but also working smart and using that data. And so now we have taken in our organization, taken a data driven approach to our
Mm.
culture. So that's part of being the persistent. So yes, there's working hard, but it's also working smart, not only measuring your data, but then shaping it, taking that data just like a farmer would as they get their, you know, all of their readings, they make adjustments accordingly so that they can again maximize their crop production. So it's the same thing to create a thriving culture where, it's bountiful. But, along the way, it's a journey. Culture's a journey, Rod. And, sometimes we don't always get it right in our organization. And going back to that failing forward, and, we might be, being really purposeful, but maybe we're not as persistent as we need to be. And then there's going to be gaps, or maybe we're being really persistent, but maybe we've lost a little bit of our being purposeful, then we are taking more of that grinding mentality. So there's times that we're going to be in one of those two quadrants, no question. But the goal is always to be up and to the right in that thriving field of culture. And then conversely, you think about those four quadrants that just surviving. Unfortunately, if you looked at some data and you looked at engagement scores, employee engagement scores, 2/3 of the workforce are disengaged. And that tells me that they're just in that kind of survival mode, which makes me sad, So, I'm going to obviously want to work where I'm at to create that thriving. I want to work with other leaders who care about it because I don't know, call it maybe a bit of a personal mission statement. Where I want to see workplaces where people can show up, be their best, and work in a thriving culture.
And then how does that apply then to your own sort of self-audit? I'll use that term. Maybe that's a more of a formal term, but I would imagine what's really interesting when you're in the position that you're in is that there's that balance between that harmony between, I guess, setting the example, right? It's fascinating when you go sort of from operations to a world where you are now, is that balance between being a good listener and then also knowing when to engage your voice in a way that is inviting, it's educational, but it's also vulnerable. Is that something that you had to learn over time, or were these coffee pot conversations so well done by your father that it really helped you understand the power of vulnerability and listening?
It definitely started, back to, growing up, but it is a journey and a process. And Rod, you mentioned about, your kids. And if my kids were here today, you know, over my shoulder, they would be telling you, Rod, that my dad likes to talk about avoiding the ditches.
Ah,
Okay, stay out of the ditches, stay in the middle of the road, don't let the pendulum swing too far one way or the other way. And we do have those moments in time, where we might have a knee jerk reaction to something. I think so for me, really self audit, just try to ask myself, am I avoiding the ditches? Am I showing up in such a way that, yes, I want to be vulnerable. I want to, share who I am with the people I work with, but I also want to understand, where are those boundaries? Where's that professionalism? So, yeah, anything in life, man, just avoid the ditches.
was that a transition? So 4 years ago, when you guys were having this conversation, how did you, I mean, look, I guess you could just think, and this doesn't sound like you at all, but that you could just say, well, this is a change in title and you just have sort of different responsibilities. And now you're about execution, right? I would think that there was this, it's almost as if you're moving to a different country and you kind of need to understand the culture and you learn about customs and you start paying attention to things in a different way, right? I think about it when I've been very fortunate to travel to places, sort of these far distant corners of the planet. It changes the way that I think even today because I noticed things that were incredibly different than my world here in the US. And I guess it just sort of the aperture just widens. And I'm just wondering if you had a similar experience when you realized, wow, I'm now the chief culture officer, and you start to pay attention to different things.
Yeah. Start paying attention to different things. Absolutely. But there's some things that just stayed the same, Rod. You
Really?
know, one th well, one thing I like to tell people who maybe don't have the title like I have, they are still influencers when it comes to the culture in their organization. You don't have to have a title to influence, okay? And so I had been influencing for quite a while. Basically, our journey as far as becoming more purposeful really began in 2015. And that's where we began to say, okay, we want to be, values based. We want to be purpose driven. We began to, write it down, articulate it, make sure that we're making it a part of who we are as an organization as we talk to, our employees, team members, new ones, et cetera. So anyway, so I had been doing the work already, Rod, in lots of ways. And all that title gave me was a little bit more agency, if you will, to own it a little bit more, to steward it more. I don't own our culture. Okay. So let me, just because I have that title
Good
does
point.
not
Yeah.
mean I do not own the culture. I am simply here to steward it on behalf of not only the leadership, but the entire organization. So, yeah, there were some things that shifted in me, just maybe more like taking some greater ownership. I use that word loosely because like I said, I don't own it, but just having greater agency in what's going
Mm.
on.
So if you could go back to the version of you in the operational role,
Okay.
and you could whisper something to yourself about what was sort of coming down the pike,
Oh.
what would that be?
Oh, wow. I'm going to tell you a story, Rod, which I think you would appreciate. So, July 21st, 2021 is one of those moments that was pivotal in my life. I was wanting to sit in the seat of being the vice president for Haverkamp Properties, which is the largest part of our organization. And there was another internal candidate that also wanted the same thing. And on July 21st, 2021, I was told that I was not going to be sitting in that seat of in operations, and so um, that was something that was very impactful in lots of different ways. And there's more to that story, which I don't have time to get into. But my first phone call was to my wife just to give her the news that I didn't get it. My second phone call was to the gentleman, Dave Hyman, who is still sitting in that seat, and to say, hey, Dave, I'm here to help you be successful. And there was a moment. I mean, obviously, I had a moment to choose. Do I really want to walk the walk that I've been talking about and how important culture is. And yeah, it was just like, no, I like working here. I love working here. I love the people here. I'm going to be here to support. I'm not going to take my ball and run, you know?
Mm.
And so going back and I wouldn't do anything different, Rod. I guess, you said, hey, what would I tell myself? I would just tell myself, keep doing the things that you're doing, you know? um, the good and the bad, because the things that we messed up on, so we learned from that, and that just helped us get better.
Is that a story that you share across the company or when you're presenting?
Oh, yeah. Well, not when
Mm,
I'm presenting. I'll tell that story often. Okay, you talked about development. We have a program called Leaders in Training, and one of the things that they have to do is they have to sit down with different leaders within our organization and interview them. And often I will get a question from one of our participants in the lit program of, you know, "Hey, can you explain one of the most difficult, challenging moments in your profession?" That's the story I go to.
that's the story.
That's the store I go to, and, they sit there and because they know Dave, they know me, they didn't know maybe this was, "Wow, but you guys get along great," Well, yeah, we can still get along great just because I didn't get what I wanted per se. It ended up being good because now everyone always says, "Well, Todd, I think it ended up working out for the best because you are perfect for the seat that you're sitting in."
Yeah. What did you learn about yourself through that process? I mean, I think that what's fascinating, see, this is what you wouldn't see in the headline, right? In that moment, hearing that news, you're a husband, you're a father,
Yeah,
right? You have some level of influence to your point earlier that you don't have to have a title to do it. And so, in essence, you're receiving that news not in isolation, not as a standalone at all. You are actually a representative of a lot of different people.
yeah.
And there's also the human element, the component of being emotional, grieving things that we
Oh,
thought we wanted. That's all a part of it, right? You can't sort of get that out of the bag and separate that out. So I'm just curious as to was there something that you leaned into that just was sort of that North Star?
well, Rod, I am a person of faith, so that's what I really leaned into. Man, I might get emotional, Rod. I was not planning on going here, but I might get emotional, Rod. I don't know if you've ever had any guests get emotional, but anyway, here it goes. I'll be real, be vulnerable. So actually, what was going on in my life, Rod? I said it was a longer story, so I guess if you want to edit this out, we can do that later. But the longer story was I had a near death experience, and I don't use that term lightly. Was specific with July 21st, 2021. I see that as a watershed moment. And the other watershed moment in my life was May 23rd, 1986. So that was 35 years prior to this July event that I just referenced to. That near death experience, Rod, I was a senior in high school, just had graduated in Iowa, you still play baseball in the summertime. So it was our last practice before our first game, and I'm really excited. I'm the starting left field. We have a very top 10 in the state type of team. I'm just all excited. We're taking fielding. Coach hits a ball. I go into the gap. I'm thinking, man, I'm going to make one of these this week in baseball, highlight reel kind of plays. I go diving, and at the same time, the center fielder comes across and kicks me in the gut. And what ended up happening was my spleen ruptured. I collapsed my lung, bruised my pancreas, bruised my heart as well. I immediately felt the rush of blood going into my abdomen. That was obviously when I said a near-death experience, when I came out of surgery and was awake enough and was talking to the doctor said, "Todd, do not play the lottery. You used your 1 in a million. I've never seen anything like this before. Usually we can repair a spleen, but yours just ruptured. There was just pieces everywhere." It's like, okay, that happened. And I said this maybe a little bit earlier. I think when adversity happens, we don't understand what's going to come out on the other side of it all the time. Obviously, I'm 17 years old. I don't know what's going to come out of this. It's only, looking backwards that I can see the goodness, if you will, that came out of that. Um, so then, we're going to fast forward 35 years, July. Well, as the then president of Haverkamp Properties, who's a good friend of mine, was having this conversation with me, telling me I'm not going to become the president of of Haverkamp Properties. I'm just thinking to myself, you know, I've got bigger things that are going on right now because prior to that, I was told that they found a mass inside my lower abdomen and they had to, they were doing all these testing. Finally, they got to the point where they said, we're going to have to biopsy whatever that mass is. And so, I'm working with the doctor. Doctor's starting to line up an oncologist, everything like that. On July 21st, I'm going to get my results. So I'm sitting there on July 21st thinking, okay, yeah, this is disappointing.
The same day.
The same day I was told, you're going to get the results of your biopsy. And whatever you do, wait until tomorrow when the doctor's telling you this. Whatever you do, don't go to, Dr. Google and find out what this is. Just wait until you talk to me. Well, I can't resist that.
Yeah, when they say that, right?
Yeah. Don't think about an elephant, type of thing. Um, so anyway, so I that's in the back of my mind, like, hey, I've got literally, I don't know if I'm dealing with cancer or what's going on here. So, and at that time, only my wife, Kendra, and I were going through that together. We didn't tell anybody else because there may not be anything to, bring alarm
Hmm.
to. And that's the end. I mean, that's part of the story. There wasn't anything to be alarming. So that night I finally, got a ding on my phone, got a notification. I open up and the diagnosis is splenosis. And when I went to the doctor the next day, Dr. Carlisle had been in business for a long time, been a doctor for a long time. He said, Todd, I don't even know what splenosis is. I called up the oncologist. I said, have you ever heard of splenosis? He had never heard of it. He goes, so I had to go through my journals. Well, what splenosis is spleen tissue. So 35 years later, 35 years prior, when I had this near-death experience, my spleen ruptures. There's a tiny bit of my spleen that eventually worked its way down to this area that nobody knew was there, but showed up on this one X-ray, and they start thinking maybe it's cancerous, but no, it's just spleen tissue, something that's harmless. It's no big deal. But what I felt like it was a gift from God that He knew. This is where I sometimes get emotional. Sorry. He knew I was going to need that perspective. That there are some things that are more important than a title and work. I'm sorry.
No, it's an incredible story. As you were saying that, I just thought it's just this feeling. A reminder that it flashes you back to '86. It flashes you back to diving for that ball and waking. It's really it's like a snow globe of your life across 35 years that you
Right.
shake it up and you say, oh, like the role that it played, that appreciation piece.
Yeah. Yeah. So when that news came down the pipe, yeah, I went through the grieving process on July 21st. I didn't get what I wanted. But again, I was thinking there's something more important going on. I don't know if I'm going to be having to walk through dealing with cancer or not. Again, I didn't have to go through that journey. That was not something I had to deal with. And I know there are men and women who have to walk through that journey. But um, yeah, it just gave me a perspective that I think helped shape me to respond rightly to that moment, to say, hey, I care about things that are bigger than a job title. I care about people. I care about, that experience.
I know you're not asking me, but I think when you're presenting with professional colleagues around the country that like that's the not because it's an emotional tug,
Mhm.
but because I think whether we've been in some, accident like you were in or it's all relative, right? I mean, there are
Right.
points in time that we're time stamped, right?
Yeah.
And for so many that can relate to when they lost a position, there was downsizing, even just in the professional ranks, or
Right.
they didn't get into the school that they wanted to, or
Yes.
you just sort of go down the list. These are, this is a trite example, but tying into sports. I'm a very big sports fan, and my kids, I think about this because I've helped to raise them as very big sports fans for my
Yes.
Detroit teams.
Yes.
And, there was one of the sport, whatever, we lost in the playoffs and they were just devastated.
Yeah.
And in that moment as a dad, I had to say to them, guys, here's the beauty of sports. We have experienced every emotion.
Yes.
And that's been something that we've shared, right? I know you're hurting now, but this is a lot better
Yes.
than not feeling this together, right? And so that's what that made me think about is that your story isn't just about, on the surface, I can't believe this guy survived. This is incredible. It's just about understanding our place. And I do think, Todd, that this kind of goes back to the very beginning that, that conversation at the soccer field that I shared,
Right.
right? Like that dad who's a very nice human, and loving dad and community member, you know, his spleen didn't explode, uh, you know, but he's dealing now with what feels as if it's a trip to the ER professionally and wondering, how do you handle this? Because he is a father and a husband and a community member, and he's bearing the weight of conversations he's afraid to have. That to me is about culture. This ties it all the way back, does it not?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that unites all of us in humanity is the fact that we are going to deal with pain at some point. And this isn't a contest to say that my pain is worse than your pain. It's nothing like that. We all feel pain. And you know, I guess going back to the culture thing and going back to that connectiveness, it's just going back to being human and understand that there's going to be points and times that everybody's going to feel some kind of pain point. And so, how do we show up for our colleagues, for our team members, just to be there for them, help them understand it, help them process it, you know? I love the sports analogy. Having 4 kids who went through sports, Rod, it was such a safe place, I'll say, to learn what adversity is like and how to process it. And the thing I always try to teach them is that, we don't know what's on the other side of this adversity, but it's gonna make us better. It's gonna make us better.
And I think you're so well positioned. I mean, these are my words, and this isn't just because we're chatting here today, but in a world where, I guess lectured at Vanderbilt's Business School for years on storytelling and business and these things, and I think about those young people often because I know that there are a great percentage of them that are wondering about the pursuits that they originally thought were sort of a slam dunk, to use a sports analogy, professionally, because they were doing something that their parent or their an aunt or uncle had done in finance and these different things, and they're starting to see that that might not be as viable as it once was 7, 8, 10 years ago. And if that's the case, we're really going to want to connect with people that again, it's all relative, but it's in essence that you may have an idea of what I'm starting to realize about my horizon line, and trying to have an appreciation for the skills and the relationships and slowing down time in a way that is purposeful and persistent and that plants, to your point, for a thriving culture. Because if not, it becomes a very lonely existence. And I think we're going to need more time understanding each other's stories than less. And what a fantastic example. I mean, I knew this right away, but to think that Nick and Zach that you were named a catalyst for CultureCon. Wow, well done by them. Boy, I hate giving those guys compliments. I'm kidding. They're really great guys. That's right. That's right. But it speaks to, like, you wouldn't know this on a resume. You wouldn't know this on a LinkedIn profile. Nobody would know if they looked up your profile that, like, this is what you're made of, not a PowerPoint, right? Or a slide deck that neatly organizes images and words into, to your words, sort of a simpler approach to the foundational elements that make us who we are in community with others. But this kind of story, this connection is, I know it sits with me. I would have no doubt that it's going to sit with listeners. That's what's really powerful. So yeah, I feel bad that you got emotional during our podcast here, but I will tell you that I think I speak for listeners in the CultureCon community that this is to me, what leadership is. And we're going to find that because when we're entering a world and we're in a world where we can get the answers wherever we want,
Mhm.
well, isn't it the story behind? I think that's probably what it is. I want to make sure people can connect with the Haverkamp Group. You can go to haverkamp.com. Check out CultureCon. They have events all the time. They just, I believe, there's an AI summit. They've got their CultureCon event in Madison, Wisconsin in August. I mean, these guys are really on top of it. And if you haven't, I would love it if you checked out my book, The Narrative Edge: Authentic Storytelling That Meets the Moment. And I'll even quote Nick and Zach here in their review of the book, just because of our shared love of storytelling. But they were saying that The Narrative Edge masterfully bypasses superficial interactions, diving straight into the depths of human connection. A collection of stories illuminates how authentic encounters shape individual lives and create powerful ripple effects that resonate across communities and cultures. It's an honor to be storyteller in residence for CultureCon, and it's an even bigger honor to spend time with someone who's impacting not just his friends and family, but those families that rely on their opportunity there at Haverkamp. And it's the stories that you share, Todd, that I know make me better and influence the way in which I think about what I hold dear and the stories that I think stitch together to create that harmony that you speak of. We want to thank Todd Wuestenberg. He is the Chief Culture Officer at Haverkamp Group, and I'm your host, Dr. Rod Berger. Every organization has data. Every leader has a title. But the ones who actually move people, they have a story. I'm Dr. Rod Berger, storyteller, author of The Narrative Edge, and your storyteller in residence here at CultureCon. And this is a conversation with one of our culture catalysts. These are leaders who understand that culture isn't built through policies and posters. It's built through the stories that get told in hallways, in meetings, in the quiet moments when no one's performing. The leaders you'll hear from in this series aren't just shaping workplaces, they're shaping narratives. And at their core, they're storytellers, whether they know it yet or not. So here's the question I want us to sit with today. Are you the author of your story, or are you a character in someone else's? Let's find out together.